This is a look forward interview from S&P Global. My name is Nathan Hunt. My guest today is Charles Mounts, Chief DeFi Officer at S&P Global Ratings. For those of you who don't know the lingo nowadays, DeFi stands for Decentralized Finance. We're going to be discussing an article Chuck co-authored recently in our Look Forward report entitled Toward a Tokenized Future. So let's dive in. Chuck, let's get the annoying question out of the way first. FTX has collapsed. The price of Bitcoin has fallen from its peak. Should we even be talking about tokenization at this point?
Absolutely. That's a good question. And I think that when you talk about crypto finance and DeFi, usually the first point of context that people go to is asset values, and most notably directly to Bitcoin. And when we talk about the creation of decentralized markets and the creation of a new financial credit intermediation system, it goes way beyond kind of an individual crypto asset or asset values. And so what we really are focusing on here at S&P Global is the build out of a new financial ecosystem, a new set of financial rails that will complement and disrupt the existing traditional financial rails that are decentralized and powered by the combination of cryptography, blockchain, and smart contracts. So the crypto winter that we're in, that was really precipitated by the Terra Luna stablecoin collapse, which then set into motion a series of what I would consider really a systemic crisis in the centralized finance arena, which has all the hallmarks of a traditional credit crisis, banking crisis, in the sense that there was a combination of excess leverage, poor risk controls, asset liability mismatches, fraud, all came together to provide a context of uncertainty and distrust, which then in turn led to liquidity strains, which then in turn led to solvency strains. So you've had a systemic crisis and a series of bankruptcies, particularly centered in the CFI part of the market, the centralized finance part of the crypto financing market. And asset values have plunged. So from the peak in the fourth quarter of 21, Bitcoin and Ethereum, other leading cryptocurrencies are down 72 to 75% or so. But what's really interesting is during that same time frame, the development of smart contract development has increased almost 300%. So, and that's typical. When you see a crash in the valuations, when you look at prior bear markets or prior crypto winners, that's when all the development happens or the development accelerates, and that's exactly what we're seeing in this cycle. So far from being like the end of the story, this is just the beginning of the story with this new capability and this new evolution of credit intermediation capabilities in DeFi.
So what makes tokenization a good idea? I mean, we have equities markets, we have fixed income markets, we have commodities markets, we have energy markets. They all sort of work right now. What's the benefit?
The primary benefit is going to be around gaining access, providing liquidity to asset classes that were traditionally perhaps harder to access, and having an ability to access those markets in fractionalized versions, so making them more accessible for a wider set of investors. And so at the end of the day, that's really about democratization of access to the financial services and different asset classes. I get asked the question often, are we in an evolution or a revolution as it relates to DeFi? And I would answer it by saying it's both. Right now, I think we're in the evolutionary phase, which is looking at how markets function and finding opportunities for efficiency gain and synergies to access credit intermediation and financial products. And you can see that in various actions that have been taken around the marketplace and some of the tokenizations that already happened, like with some tokenization of funds. The revolution comes, however, I think, when you have the creation of new of new capital pools and new types of borrowers who are able to access those capital pools all on decentralized financial rails. That's the revolution, and that hasn't really started yet. So I would say we're firmly planted on the evolution phase, and even that's in its beginning, but the revolution, I think, is still to come.
So let's talk about evolution or revolution. In terms of tokenization, what assets do you see being tokenized in the next, let's call it 5 years?
So I guess the first thing I'd say is that in crypto and DeFi, 5 years is an eternity.
Right.
So the whole crypto market is 10 or 11 years old. DeFi is 2 years old. The market that is bringing real-world assets on chain and credit kind of access in DeFi is even younger than that, maybe a year plus old. So 5 years is really a long time frame. So I'll just put that out there as a general comment. I think that there's a lot of speculation or thoughts about, tokenizing bond markets and tokenizing equity markets. And those will happen, I think. The equity market, I don't think it's quite as compelling because equity markets are already more efficient than many other global financial markets. Maybe the bond market is a more logical place to see tokenization really starting to take off. But probably the number one place for near-term impact and opportunity sets is in private markets. So that could be private equity or private credit. And the ability to open up kind of the accessibility to those types of investments from a wider audience that is with fewer frictions on the way. And so the tokenization of real-world assets that investors can pool and fractionalize and get access to on DeFi rails, I think will be probably the most important evolution and turning into revolution in the space in the coming 5 years.
Well, that leads naturally to my next question. I know private markets have a huge amount of regulation around who is allowed to invest, who's a qualified investor. What kinds of structures in terms of regulation, but also in terms of technology, do you think have to be in place in order to achieve this tokenized future you envision?
Yeah, so that's a good question on where does tokenization, I talked about the democratization of access to assets as one of the primary benefits of tokenization. And that will go hand in hand with regulatory and policy developments. And that's really, I think, probably the most important catalyst in the sector and non-technology driven catalyst in the DeFi landscape. So kind of going back to your original question with FTX, I do think that FTX, the implosion from FTX has galvanized action on the policy formation side, and that we are likely to see a more focused approach from both a legislative perspective as well as a regulatory perspective. And that will help lay some of the groundwork for how this industry gets regulated, including kind of who has access to it and what are the thresholds that are employed to have access to that. So, I don't know if or how the regulatory definitions that we currently know are going to be adapted to make way for this kind of new set of financial rails. But what I do feel is that the regulatory framework is going to have to be adjusted to become fit for purpose in decentralized markets. And I think how you define customers and how you define their sophistication is going to be also part of the mix of the discussion about what our future regulatory environment looks like.
Chuck, we've been pretty successful as a company with the market structured the way they are right now. You're talking about an evolution, you're talking about a revolution. Is there a role for S&P Global?
I think it's very exciting for a company like S&P Global, world's leading, largest rating agency, world's largest index provider, world's leading provider of data analytic platforms and benchmarks. Like, we definitely have a role to play here. And I say that with confidence because if you look at the hopes of DeFi maximalists is that it's completely decentralized and there's no role for centralized parties. And then on the other hand, you have central markets maximalists who say, well, there's no role for DeFi. I think the truth is we're going to end up in the middle in a hybrid environment for a very long time, if not forever, where you have decentralized financial rails with component parts of centralization. So one of the things we know for sure is that when you are in a credit intermediation system and taking risk, you need a trusted source of what the risks you're taking are. That's true. It's like our chief economist, Paul Grunwald, would often say, the rules of gravity still apply. And that's the case here too. And if the last year has shown us anything, it is that there's a desperate need for an understanding, a trusted source of shining a light on what the risks are in the ecosystem. And I don't see that changing. That's still going to be in demand. So then the question is, who's going to provide it? And what are the parameters of that analysis that leads stakeholders to really understand the kind of risks they're taking, both macro risks and micro risks? And S&P Global is really well positioned to be able to provide that trusted source of a holistic risk assessment in the landscape.
Chuck, thank you so much for joining me. I always love to talk to you.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's been great.
To read Chuck's tokenization article or the other articles in our Look Forward series, please look at the show notes. Thank you.